The grand halls of Vihalis shimmered under the soft glow of crystalline lights. The air carried the faint scent of exotic flowers, a staple of the Seraphim homeworld. It was a historic moment. Humans and Seraphim had come together for a diplomatic gathering, an event meant to strengthen ties between the two species. Among the human delegation was Nathan Carter, an explorer and researcher fascinated by alien cultures. He had spent years traveling between different worlds, learning their customs, but nothing had prepared him for what was about to happen. Nathan stood among the Seraphim, admiring their elegant, almost ethereal forms. Their skin shimmered slightly, and their eyes, larger than human eyes, held a depth of wisdom. Their movements were graceful, like flowing water, and their voices carried a melodic hum when they spoke. As part of the ceremony, humans were encouraged to engage in a traditional selection ritual, a harmless cultural practice where Seraphim showcased their talents, and guests acknowledged them with a simple gesture of interest, a light touch to the shoulder. Nathan, curious but unaware of the deeper meaning behind it, found himself drawn to a particular Seraphim girl. She stood slightly apart from the others, watching the humans with cautious curiosity. Her name was Elira, and unlike the rest of her kind, who wore grand robes and jewelry, she was dressed in simpler garments. She had a quiet presence, yet something about her was captivating. Without thinking too much, Nathan stepped forward and lightly tapped her shoulder in appreciation of her presence. Elira's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. The room, once filled with soft murmurs and music, fell into absolute silence. The Seraphim around them stopped moving, their expressions frozen in shock. Even the elders, who rarely showed emotion, exchanged glances of disbelief. Nathan, sensing the tension, frowned. Did I do something wrong? Elira swallowed hard, her glowing eyes locked onto his. You chose me. Her voice was barely a whisper, laced with uncertainty and something else, fear. Nathan blinked, confused. Chose you. One of the Seraphim elders stepped forward, his face unreadable. Human, do you not understand what you have done? His voice carried the weight of centuries. Nathan shook his head. No, I thought it was just a simple. Elira cut him off, her voice trembling. In our culture, the touch you just gave, it is the bond of selection. We mate for life. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. The weight of her words hit him like a thunderstrike. Had he just accidentally proposed to an alien? The murmurs returned, growing into hushed discussions. The humans in the delegation exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the gravity of the mistake. And for the first time in her life, Elira felt truly trapped. Nathan's stomach twisted as the weight of Elira's words sank in. He looked around the room, hoping for some kind of explanation, some reassurance that this was just a misunderstanding. But the expressions of the Seraphim told him otherwise. The elder stepped forward, his gaze stern. Human, our people do not form casual relationships. The bond you initiated is sacred. It cannot be undone. Nathan's pulse quickened. Wait, this is a mistake. I didn't know. I just thought it was part of the ceremony. Elira's hands clenched at her sides, her golden eyes burning with emotion. You do not want this bond. Nathan hesitated. He didn't even know what this bond truly meant. Marriage. The lifelong partnership. He had barely met her. I don't even know you, he admitted. And you don't know me. The room remained silent. Elira's face darkened, her normally serene expression replaced with something between disappointment and frustration. The elder sighed. Had you been one of our kind, your bond would already be sealed. Nathan exhaled in relief, but then the elder continued. However, you are human. There is still a chance. Nathan latched onto those words. A chance. The elder nodded. If you do not wish to honor the bond, you may reject her. But doing so means Elira will be cast out of her people, forever unbonded. A life of exile. Nathan's stomach dropped. He turned to Elira, expecting her to be angry at him, but instead, he saw something worse. Fear. This is not fair, Nathan muttered. I didn't ask for this, and neither did she. Alyra finally spoke, her voice quieter this time. It does not matter. It has happened. Nathan could see the way her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. This wasn't just about culture. This was about her entire future. Taking a deep breath, he ran a hand through his hair. There has to be another way. The elder's gaze hardened. There is one. You can prove your worth and earn the right to step away without consequence. If you succeed, Alyra will be free, and you will not be bound by tradition. Nathan looked at Alyra, searching her expression. Did she want him to try? Alyra's lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but then she turned her gaze away. She didn't know what to feel. A lifetime of being told that mating bonds were absolute, that once chosen, there was no other path, and now a human had broken every rule. Nathan straightened. He didn't know what the trial would be, but he wasn't about to ruin someone's life over an accident. I'll do it, he said firmly. I'll prove my worth. The elder nodded. Then prepare yourself, human. The trial of proving begins at dawn. And in that moment, Alyra wasn't sure if she wanted him to succeed or fail. Nathan sat on the stone bench outside the Seraphim temple, staring at the twin moons of Vihalis. The air was cool, carrying the scent of night-blooming flowers. Everything around him was alien, yet the problem in front of him felt very human. He had accidentally bonded with Alyra. If he rejected her, she would be exiled. If he accepted her, his life would change forever. And now he had to prove his worth in some unknown trial to break the bond without consequences. He sighed, rubbing his temples. How do I get myself into these things? Footsteps approached, light but deliberate. Nathan turned to see Alyra standing nearby, her golden eyes unreadable. You do not have to do this, she said quietly. The trials are difficult. No human has ever taken them. Nathan chuckled dryly. No human has ever accidentally proposed to an alien before, either. Alyra's expression didn't change, but something in her posture softened. You are different from what I expected. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Expected? She hesitated. We have studied humans, but only from afar. Our elders say your kind is reckless, impatient, ruled by emotions. Yet, you chose to face the trials instead of walking away. Nathan sighed. I just don't want to ruin your life over a mistake. Alyra looked away, a strange tension in her shoulders. You see this as a mistake. Nathan hesitated. He didn't want to hurt her feelings, but what else could he say? I don't know what to think. She nodded slowly, as if expecting that answer. The trials will not be easy. They test the heart, the mind, and the body. If you fail, you will be bound to me, whether you wish it or not. Nathan smirked. No pressure, huh? For the first time, Alyra let out a small, almost amused breath. No pressure. Silence settled between them. The stars above twinkled like distant fireflies. Finally, Nathan spoke. If I pass, what happens to you? Alyra's expression grew distant. I will be free, but an unbonded seraphim is incomplete. It is rare, and not many accept such a fate. Nathan frowned. So no matter what happens, you lose something. She didn't respond, but he could see the truth in her eyes. Nathan exhaled, shaking his head. This is insane. Alyra finally met his gaze. You are not wrong. A soft chime rang from the temple, signaling the coming dawn. The first trial begins soon, Alyra said. Rest, human. Nathan watched as she walked away, her silver-blue hair swaying behind her. He wasn't sure what the trials would bring, but one thing was clear. This was no longer just about proving his worth. It was about finding a way where neither of them had to lose. The sun of Vihalis rose, casting golden light over the towering crystal structures of the Seraphim temple. Nathan stood in the open courtyard, surrounded by Seraphim elders and dignitaries. The air was thick with tension. Alyra stood a short distance away, her gaze fixed on him, unreadable. She had told him last night that the trials would be difficult, but he still had no idea what to expect. The elder stepped forward, his voice steady. The first trial is a test of the heart. It will reveal who you truly are, beyond words or appearances. Nathan frowned. And how exactly do you test that? Without answering, the elder gestured toward a seraphim priestess, who approached Nathan with a small glowing orb in her hands. She extended it toward him. This is the sphere of truth, the elder explained. It will draw upon your deepest fears, regrets, and memories. If you can face what it shows you without breaking, you pass. If you falter, the bond remains. Nathan swallowed hard. That sounded incredibly unfair. Great, he muttered, then hesitantly reached out and touched the orb. The moment his fingers met its surface, a shockwave of energy rushed through his mind. The world around him melted away. Inside the trial, the fear within. Nathan found himself standing in a ruined battlefield. The sky was dark, filled with smoke and fire. Broken ships littered the ground, and the air smelled of burnt metal and death. His heart pounded. He knew this place, the Battle of Iskar 7. It was the mission that had gone terribly wrong. He had been part of an expedition team, meant to study an ancient alien ruin, but they had been ambushed by raiders. He had fought, done everything he could, but people had died. He heard their voices now, screaming, calling his name. Nathan turned and saw them, his fallen teammates, their faces twisted in pain, their eyes accusing. "You left us," one of them whispered. "No." Nathan took a step back. "I didn't have a choice." The shadows pressed in around him, suffocating. The weight of his past failures crushed his chest. He had survived, but they had not. Was this who he really was? A coward who lived while others died? Panic clawed at his throat. His vision blurred. But then, amidst the darkness, a voice cut through. "Nathan." He turned sharply. A Lyra stood before him, glowing like a beacon in the darkness. But this wasn't really her. It was the bond. The trial showing him something deeper. "You cannot change the past," she said, "but you can decide what kind of man you will be now." Nathan's breath steadied. The fear didn't vanish, but it no longer controlled him. He clenched his fists. "I won't run." The battlefield shattered like glass. Back in the real world. Nathan gasped as the vision faded. He was back in the temple courtyard, sweat dripping down his face. The elder studied him for a long moment before nodding. "You have passed." Nathan exhaled in relief. Aelira, watching from afar, felt something stir inside her. Maybe, just maybe, this human was stronger than she thought. Nathan stood in the grand hall of trials, the cold stone beneath his feet. The first trial had nearly broken him, forcing him to face his past. But he had survived. Now he had to face the second challenge, a test of intelligence and strategy. Aelira watched him from a distance, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Nathan had proven he had a strong heart, but now he had to prove he had a sharp mind. The Seraphim elder stepped forward, his gaze piercing. "The second trial is one of intellect. You must escape the labyrinth of shifting paths before the final chime of the temple bell. If you fail, you will remain bound to Aelira." Nathan rolled his shoulders. "All right. How hard could it be?" The elder gestured, and the floor beneath Nathan began to shift. The ground rumbled as walls rose from the earth, forming a massive labyrinth that stretched high above him. The entrance sealed behind him, trapping him inside. Nathan exhaled sharply. Great, a giant alien maze. Just another normal day. Inside the labyrinth, the walls shifted and moved, changing their positions every few minutes. Nathan quickly realized that memorization wouldn't help. The paths kept closing and opening in random patterns. "All right," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Think, Nathan. You're not going to brute force your way through this. He crouched down and pressed his hand against the floor, feeling for vibrations. The movement of the walls wasn't completely random. There was a pattern, a cycle that repeated every few minutes. "Got it," he murmured. Nathan moved quickly, watching the walls and predicting their movements before they shifted. He slipped through openings just before they closed, barely making it past some sections. But then, a deep growl echoed through the corridors. Nathan's body tensed. "Oh, come on. There's a monster in here too." A shadow moved ahead, and a massive guardian beast stepped into view. Its glowing blue eyes locked onto Nathan, its claws scraping against the stone floor. Nathan took a slow step back. "Hey, big guy, let's talk about this." The beast roared and charged. Nathan dove to the side, barely dodging the attack. His heart pounded. There was no way he could fight this thing. It was twice his size and clearly built for hunting intruders. He needed a plan. Nathan remembered something Elira had said before the trial. The labyrinth is built to test strategy, not strength. That meant the beast wasn't the real obstacle. It was a distraction. Nathan took off running, not trying to fight but leading the beast toward a dead-end passage. As expected, the walls shifted behind it, trapping the creature inside. Nathan grinned. Checkmate. With the beast locked away, Nathan sprinted toward the exit. As he reached the end of the labyrinth, the temple bell rang, just in time. Outside the labyrinth, Nathan stepped out, breathing hard. The Seraphim elders watched him in silent approval. "You have passed the second trial," the elder announced. Nathan wiped sweat from his forehead and glanced at Elira. For the first time, she was smiling, just a little. Maybe. She was starting to believe in him too. Nathan stood in the open arena, the sun of Vihalis casting long shadows over the ancient battleground. The final trial was here. His heart pounded, but he refused to show hesitation. Elira watched from the edge of the arena, her golden eyes locked onto him. She had seen him pass the first two trials, facing his fears and outsmarting the labyrinth. But this trial was different. This was a test of strength and resolve. The Seraphim elder stepped forward. "The final trial is one of combat. You must face a warrior of our people. Victory is not required, but you must prove your determination. If you surrender or run, you fail." Nathan swallowed hard. He wasn't a soldier, he was an explorer, but he had been in fights before. He could hold his own, at least for a while. From the opposite side of the arena, his opponent stepped forward. A massive Seraphim warrior, standing nearly 7 feet tall, clad in ceremonial battle armor. His muscles rippled beneath his shimmering skin, and in his hands he held a combat staff that crackled with energy. Nathan exhaled. Of course, it couldn't be a fair fight. The crowd watched in silence as the elder raised his hand. "Begin." The fight begins. The Seraphim warrior moved like lightning, his staff striking toward Nathan in a blur. Nathan barely dodged, feeling the crackle of energy as the weapon passed inches from his face. He stumbled back, his mind racing. He couldn't match the warrior in raw strength. If he tried, he would be crushed in seconds. Nathan needed a strategy. The warrior lunged again, and this time Nathan rolled to the side, avoiding the blow. He stayed light on his feet, forcing his opponent to keep chasing him instead of landing a clean hit. The warrior frowned. "You run." Nathan smirked. "Nope, just making you work for it." The warrior growled and charged forward. Nathan saw his chance. He ducked under the strike and grabbed a handful of sand from the ground, throwing it into the warrior's eyes. The Seraphim stumbled, momentarily blinded. The crowd gasped. Nathan didn't waste time. He rushed forward, grabbing the warrior's staff and yanking it away. With a quick spin, he flipped it in his hands and aimed it at his opponent. The warrior blinked, his vision clearing. He looked down at the weapon now in Nathan's hands, then laughed. "You fight like a human," he said with a nod. "Clever. Unexpected." The elder raised his hand. Enough. The trial is complete. Nathan lowered the staff, breathing hard. Had he won? The elder stepped forward. Victory was not the goal. Determination was. You stood your ground. You have passed. Elira's choice. Nathan turned to Elira. She was staring at him with something new in her eyes. Respect. For the first time, she saw him not as a mistake, but as a worthy partner. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't want him to break the bond after all. The arena was silent, except for the whispers of the gathered seraphim. Nathan had passed all 3 trials, but the air was heavy with tension. The elders gathered at the high dais, their expressions unreadable. Nathan stood in the center of the arena, his body sore from the fight, but his mind sharp. He knew the real challenge had just begun. Elira stepped closer, her presence drawing his attention. She didn't look at him right away, her gaze fixed on the elders. The trials were done, but the decision wasn't entirely in Nathan's hands or hers. This union defies tradition, one elder finally said, his voice carrying over the murmuring crowd. Never in our history has a human bonded with one of our kind. Another elder added, our people must remain strong, united. Introducing an outsider, an untested species, could weaken us. Nathan clenched his fists. He'd fought, he'd endured, and yet it still didn't feel like enough. Before he could respond, Elira spoke, her voice calm but firm. You speak of unity, yet you would reject the bond that was chosen. Is our culture so fragile that it cannot accept something new? The crowd stirred. Elira's words were bold, and Nathan could see the weight they carried. She wasn't just defending him. She was questioning the very foundation of their society. The elders glanced at one another. The senior elder leaned forward, studying Nathan with sharp, glowing eyes. Human, why do you persist? You could have walked away. Why risk so much for a bond you never intended? Nathan exhaled. Because it's not just about me. I didn't ask for this bond, but it happened. If I had left, Elira would have been cast out. I couldn't let that happen. And after everything I've seen here, I believe that this bond, however unusual, can be a bridge between our species. His words hung in the air. Some of the seraphim looked uncertain, others intrigued. One of the younger elders spoke. Perhaps this bond is not a threat, but an opportunity. The human has shown resilience, intelligence, and a willingness to honor our ways. Should we not consider what this could mean for our future? A louder murmur ran through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others crossed their arms in disapproval. The senior elder raised his hand for silence. This is a matter that must be debated. The council will convene at sunset to decide. Until then, the bond remains. Nathan felt a wave of frustration, but kept his face neutral. The trials were over, yet the political struggle had just begun. As the crowd began to disperse, Elira stepped closer. For the first time, she looked directly into Nathan's eyes. You've done more than I expected, she said softly. Whatever happens next, I thank you. Her words, quiet but sincere, gave Nathan a small measure of comfort. He had come to this world as a stranger, but now, even if just in her eyes, he was something more. The sun set over Vihalis, bathing the crystalline city in shades of purple and gold. Inside the High Council chamber, the air was heavy with tension. The elders had yet to make their final decision about Nathan and Elira's bond. For now, Nathan remained on the temple grounds under close watch. Nathan paced the room they had assigned him. The trials were behind him, but his fate was still uncertain. The seraphim guards outside his door stood motionless, their glowing eyes ever alert. Still, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Across the temple, Elira sat by a low-burning lantern, lost in thought. She had seen Nathan endure trials no human had ever faced, and part of her no longer doubted his strength or courage. But would it matter? Could the council truly allow their bond to stand? Suddenly, a distant sound echoed through the halls, the sharp crack of breaking crystal. Elira's head snapped up. Something wasn't right. She hurried to her window and peered out, catching a glimpse of shadowed figures moving across the temple grounds. A sudden attack. Nathan heard it too. The faint noise of movement, too stealthy to be normal temple activity. He approached the door, only to see one of the guards collapse silently. A cloaked figure stepped over the body, holding a weapon that glimmered faintly in the low light. Nathan's instincts kicked in. He didn't wait for them to strike first. Grabbing a heavy decorative urn, he hurled it toward the figure, the ceramic shattering against their shoulder. The assassin stumbled, giving Nathan just enough time to grab the fallen guard's weapon, a sleek, alien blade that hummed with energy. The second assassin lunged at him, but Nathan deflected the strike, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He wasn't a trained fighter, but his time exploring hostile worlds had taught him how to survive. "Who sent you?" Nathan growled, sidestepping another attack. The cloaked figure didn't respond, only pressing the attack harder. Meanwhile, Alara rushed down the hallways, her heart racing. She had to warn someone, but she also needed to reach Nathan. If this was an attempt on his life, the council's deliberations wouldn't matter. As she rounded a corner, she found herself face to face with one of the assassins. The figure turned toward her, their blade raised. Without thinking, Alara grabbed a ceremonial staff from the wall and blocked the strike. She wasn't a trained warrior, but she moved with the grace and speed of her people, her instincts sharp, together against the threat. In the end, it was their combined efforts that turned the tide. Nathan and Alara found themselves back to back in the temple corridor, facing the remaining assassins. They moved in sync, her agility complementing his brute determination. When the last attacker was subdued, the temple guards finally arrived. Too late to help, but just in time to see Nathan and Alara standing together, weapons in hand. The council members, drawn by the commotion, arrived moments later. The senior elder's gaze swept over the scene, taking in the unconscious assassins, the wounded guards, and Nathan standing beside Alara. It was Alara who spoke first, her voice steady. "This attack wasn't just on him. It was on our traditions, our choices. If you still doubt his worth, then you're blind to what he's already proven." Nathan glanced at her, surprised by the strength in her words. The elder studied them both in silence before finally nodding. Perhaps this bond is not so fragile after all. In the aftermath of the attack, the council's chambers buzzed with debate. The assassins had been neutralized, but their actions left a heavy shadow. Questions hung in the air. Who had sent them, and why? More importantly, could Nathan and Alira's bond truly be allowed to stand? Nathan sat quietly in a corner of the room, his bruised arm resting on his knee. His mind replayed the fight over and over. Not just the strikes and counters, but the moment Alara had appeared by his side. He couldn't deny it. Her skill, her grace, her sheer will to fight alongside him. Alara, meanwhile, stood near the council table, her golden eyes unwavering as the elders continued to argue. Some saw the bond as a threat, a dangerous break from tradition. Others, particularly the younger council members, believed the bond symbolized a new beginning. "This human," one elder said sharply, "is not one of us. We cannot ignore the risks. To allow this bond is to invite chaos." Alara stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "You saw what happened. Without him, those assassins would have succeeded. He stood his ground. He fought for himself, and for me." Another elder countered. "And what if this bond weakens our people's unity? What if it leads to more unrest?" Nathan, unable to stay silent, stood up. His voice was steady. "Look, I didn't ask for this bond, but it happened, and I've done everything I can to prove I'm not a threat. If anything, I think I've shown that humans and Seraphim have more in common than you might think." The room grew quiet. Even the most skeptical elders seemed to pause. Finally, the senior elder spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of centuries of tradition. "Alara, you are the bonded one. Tell us, do you believe this human is worthy of such a connection?" Alara turned slowly, meeting Nathan's gaze. For a moment, she hesitated, her expression unreadable. But then she took a deep breath and spoke with clarity. "Yes," she said, "he is worthy. He has shown courage, intelligence, and loyalty. He didn't run. He didn't abandon me. That is more than I can say for some of our own." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The senior elder held up a hand for silence. "Very well," he said, his tone measured. "The council recognizes the validity of this bond. From this moment, Nathan Carter is considered one with the Seraphim." Nathan blinked, barely believing what he heard. He had passed the trials, faced the assassins, and now he was accepted. Elira's lips twitched into a faint smile. Though she didn't say anything, her expression told him everything he needed to know. It wasn't just about proving himself anymore. It was about something more, something that felt like home. The decision had been made, and the tension in the air began to ease. The council adjourned, leaving Nathan and Elira standing side by side in the now empty chamber. Nathan still couldn't quite believe it. The elders had accepted their bond. The trials, the fight, and the debates were finally behind them. "Are you okay?" Nathan asked, glancing at Elira. Elira tilted her head, her glowing eyes studying him. "I am. Relieved. For the first time in my life, I feel like I have chosen my own path. I never thought it would be alongside someone so unexpected." Nathan chuckled. "I could say the same. A week ago, I didn't even know your world existed. Now it feels like I've lived a lifetime here." She smiled, a small, genuine expression that Nathan had rarely seen from her. "You have earned your place among my people, but more than that, you have earned my respect." Nathan felt his cheeks flush slightly. "Well, it wasn't easy. I thought I was a goner more times than I'd like to admit. But hey, at least I got through it without embarrassing myself too much." Elira raised an eyebrow. "You threw sand at a Seraphim warrior. That is not exactly dignified." Nathan grinned. "Hey, it worked, didn't it?" The two shared a quiet laugh. The weight that had pressed down on them for days seemed to lift just a bit. As they walked through the temple gardens, Elira paused beneath a tree with silver leaves. "What will you do now, Nathan? Your bond to me ties you to Vihalis, but I know this is not your home." Nathan thought for a moment. "You're right. My home is far away. But I don't think I'm ready to leave just yet. There's so much here I haven't seen, haven't learned. And you," he trailed off, looking at her, "you've got a whole future ahead of you. I'd like to see where that leads." Elira's eyes softened. "Then stay. Not because you are bound to me, but because you wish to be here. Let us walk this path together and see where it leads." Nathan nodded. "I'd like that." As the two of them moved forward, the temple bells chimed in the distance, signaling the end of a long and difficult journey. But for Nathan and Elira, it was just the beginning. Together, they would explore what it truly meant to be bonded, not by force, but by choice.